This is the Rebel Author Podcast, where we talk about books, business, and occasionally bad words. Hello, Rebels, and welcome to episode 287 of the Rebel Author Podcast. Today, I'm talking to Douglas Vigliotti all about Aristotle and why novelists ought to pay more attention. First, to a comment on Alex Tembladore's episode from Matt, who says, loads to think about in this interview. Great discussion, especially about how there are so many differences, not just within cultures, but even within families. Off to the library to grab her book. Thank you. In personal news and updates then, we are officially halfway through the Kickstarter. The Girl Games Kickstarter as of this morning is on 98,985 British pounds sterling, which means we are £1,015 off of the big 100k with 13 days to go. I am somewhat confident that we're going to go over it now. It's a little bit like torture at the moment, waiting for it to tick over, not least because I want the hoodies. We're unlocking the option to add on hoodies once we hit 100k, but also because, okay, admittedly, this was always the goal. It was always to do a 6-figure campaign. So I'm just desperately hoping that we're going to tick over. I'm sure we will with 2 weeks to go. We've been averaging between 500 and about £1,100 a day. So hopefully a day, 2, maybe 3 max, and we will tick over. And of course, we are in that horrendous soggy middle of any campaign. Now, in other news, I have finally got back to the desk. I am writing words, or I'm almost consistently writing words again. I got words on Monday. Tuesday, we had to do some school visits again. We're trying to finalise high school for Atlas. And then today, I am doing this podcast. I've got to go and do a bit of parcel prep, and then I will be spending the rest of the day up until Poison and Parley wording. So I feel better. Surprising nobody, writer needs to write. I feel considerably better getting words again. We're still juggling a little bit, still not quite got things the way that I want them. But, you know, once the new staff member starts, the things will get significantly easier. I have booked myself in for a personal training session. I haven't committed to a block, but I have booked one in the hopes that can kind of kickstart, and then I'll book another one, and then I'll consider perhaps joining some classes and things. But I am facing, because I haven't done it for so long, I'm facing resistance going back to the gym. And that's kind of the other big thing that really helps my mental health. So things are on the up. We have also done a giant order of books from a foreign printer, and that will take about 10 to 12 weeks. So I have realised that we're going to run out of stock, but I don't really want to do print on demand pricing. So we are looking at an intermediary printer that will do a shorter print run than 500 books, so that we can fill the stop gap with books before the big order gets delivered. I am panicking a little bit because we're going to have 1,500 books. Well, not quite 1,500 anymore, of course, because we're selling some of the girl games. So maybe let's say 1,000 by the time we get the orders, the bigger orders in. Then we're going to have 3,000 vampire books. And then we're going to have a minimum of 3,000 special editions come in. Plus, you know, another 1,500 paperbacks. So I don't think we have enough space in the warehouse. I am panicking somewhat that the warehouse is not big enough. I'm going to get some more racking. I'm not going to do it until the orders start delivering, because I don't need another distraction. If I order the racking, I will then feel like the racking needs to be built and the whole unit needs to be reorganised. It's just another thing on my to-do list. So I'm putting off ordering it until I absolutely have to, so that I can focus on writing. We are also in progress with the covers for Architecti and the maps and some other exciting things that are going to go inside. So that feels super exciting. I've also made a big decision. The novella that is going into the Kickstarter, obviously everybody who supports the Kickstarter is going to get the novella, but I have taken the decision not to release it until February 2026. Now, I reserve the right to change my mind. But basically what I realised is that because we are going to do print runs for Architecty, we need longer lead times, which means I have gotten myself to the point where I only have 3 weeks of slippage. So I can afford to fuck up another 3 weeks, but then that's it. I'm then down to the wire. So I already feel like I'm down to the wire, which is why I have to get the novella done this week and then finish editing it next week. And then I need to get on with the Architecty. Because, like I say, we need the extra long lead times so that we have time for a print run. Also, we've got to have time to fulfill the Kickstarter. We are doing it all ourselves, so it's going to knock out a couple of weeks. And I'm away for a couple of weeks in the summer. So, of course, there's a lot going on. And I usually like to bring my pre-orders early, and I don't think I'm going to be able to do that this time. Obviously, I am a little bit disappointed about this. I don't like not, consistently under-promising and over-delivering. This time I under-promised and I'm going to deliver on time. So that, it is what it is. And this is why I give myself extra long pre-orders, because God forbid I decide to take ownership of a fucking warehouse. Things get in the way of words. So this is a bit of a lesson learned for me. But we are where we are, and I still have time to get everything done. So I feel like my focus is coming back and the blinkers are coming back on. I'm able to say no a little bit more again. I am moving back into my happy space of wording. Rebel of the Week this week is Zachary Kai. Okay. Zachary says, I discovered zines, self-published booklets, at a local arts centre workshop, and I fell in love. In those 3 hours, the rules I'd heard about self-expression and creativity shattered. Here was this almost miracle, offering accessible art making and community, waiting for me to embrace it. Did I? No. The fear of the unknown and my excitement battled, and the fears won, until what would be my only chance to attend the town's zine fair. Nothing motivates like a deadline. And when the day arrived, did my fears materialise? Of course not. I received nothing but enthusiastic compliments and trades. It'll never be as bad as you think. Ah, I love that. It's like a rebellion against the self and kind of fear. And those are always the best rebellions. So congratulations and well done for getting it in. Welcome and thank you to Elme and Effie Campbell. And of course, you guys won't hear this today, but hopefully you get the Patreon notifications for our Poison and Parlay sessions at 3 p.m. UK time. Do double check the time zones, because I know that the USA have had their time zone, what's it called? Daylight savings time, and we have not here yet in the UK. But yes, today we will have our coffee chat, Coca-Cola, water, whatever, chocolate sweeties session where we all have a good knitter natter and help each other through whatever we are working on in our writing life. If you'd like to be a patron and get early access to all the episodes, as well as a bonus content like our Poison and Parlay sessions, you can from as little as $2 a month by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. Hello and welcome to the Rebel Author Podcast. Today I'm joined by Douglas Vigliotti. Douglas is the author of 4 books, including Aristotle for Novelists and Tom Collins, a slightly crooked novel, which is available to listen to on Slightly Crooked Good Stories Told Well, a podcast that also features his raw and unorthodox poem collection Mini Heartbreaks, or little poems about life. He is also the host of Books for Men, a weekly podcast to inspire more men to read. He lives in New Haven, Connecticut. Hello and welcome.
I am super happy to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction.
No, thank you for joining me. So I always ask people something about their bio before I ask the question I'm actually meant to ask first. Books for Men. Talk about that.
Right. So this is an interesting one. So I don't know where to start with this. It's sort of an open secret, I feel like, in the publishing industry that men don't read. And this is not something that a lot of people are aware of unless you actually are a man who reads and you are trying to have conversation with other men who read. And you quickly realize that a large percentage of them don't read. If you're in a group of guys, uh, let's say one out of every 10 might actually be reading something. And if they are, it's more than likely nonfiction. And so I decided to start this podcast, Books for Men, to inspire more men to read. It's not a podcast that is only featuring books that are written by men or that have, um, I don't know, war, or, things that people would think are inherently masculine. It's just, I'm a man. These are books that I like. If you're a man, you might like these too. And it's really just trying to draw attention to inspiring more men to pick up books and read. And it's something that I do every Monday. I go back and forth between fiction and nonfiction because I read quite a bit and I read across the literary spectrum, uh, everything from memoirs to biographies to crime fiction to literary fiction. I have a wide, my taste varies. And so I just do short little episodes that, on author, on the book, on the story, some of the themes, things that you'll hear me talk about today when it comes to story with Aristotle. And yeah, I mean, it's more of a passion project for me. And I could probably pick up more listeners if I didn't have it titled Books for Men, because I think that there's sometimes a misalignment of what the show's actual intention is. And, I have quite a few female listeners who often reach out to me and they say, well, why is it named Books for Men? And it's really just me trying to draw attention to, um, now, I don't want to say it's a problem, but it is kind of a problem that men aren't reading as much. And so I'm just trying to draw attention to this and say, hey, you might like this. Pick it up, read it, check it out.
Have you ever thought about doing a project to start at the source of the problem? And by that, I mean boys. Rather, and the reason that I ask you is because I am a mother to a son who is 11 years old in 2 days' time. And I, as an author, have to battle with him to read. Now, he has always read and his reading is exceptional. Half of the problems that we have is that his intellectual ability to read far surpasses his emotional intelligence and in the age of, so we've always had this problem with he gets bored with age appropriate books, but the books appropriate to his intellect are too emotionally complex for him. So we've
Mm.
always had this problem. I've just got him into Terry Pratchett. So I'm hoping that that's going to be a win. One, because it's funny, and two, because it had the word arse in it about 3 pages in. And I was like, you know what, kid? I don't give a shit. Like, if you're going to need a little swear word to read the book, just read it. I don't care. I mean, he doesn't say much other than shit and arse, I think, Terry Pratchett. But anyway, yeah, I wondered if you ever thought about doing that. And I think my second question about this is like, what is the stigma?
Right, right. So these are both really, really good questions. And I do think that there's a little bit nature and a little bit nurture, and it's always hard to try to decipher which is what and how much one influences the other. But I think that there is something to, and I don't know why or how, but there is something to the idea that nonfiction is has more seen value than reading fiction does. And for some reason, men, from my experience, tend to be more transactional and less emotional. And so the exchange with a nonfiction book and why podcasts and audiobooks and these other forms have been done so well is because the value proposition is much clearer for the man, right? Like, so it means like this book, if you read this book, it will save you time. If you read this book it will make you look better to your friends. If you read this book, it will make you more money. I don't know. There's like these direct transactional value exchanges that I feel like are easier for men than saying, which, by the way, I think there's a ton of value in reading fiction, which is why part of the reason why I do the podcast and why I write fiction. But I think all of that value is unseen. And so when you tell somebody, like, read this book because you're going to be more empathetic towards people, you're going to be able to entertain other viewpoints, you're going to have more patience because you're going to delay gratification because all the good stuff doesn't happen until the end. All of these, or you're going to be able to deal with difficult opinions and difficult concepts a lot easier because reading in its form is less reactive and it's more intimate. So you could say things on the page that are and write things that are easier to take in on the page because of the form than it is to watch or listen to, because that it's much more of a reactive form of media when you're watching something or listening to something. But again, like this elaborate value proposition that I am presenting, no man is that I know is going to be like, oh, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. They just want to go to something to be entertained. And I feel like now it's easier than ever to be entertained through other forms of media like social media and Netflix and audiobooks and all these other forms that are less demanding, but they actually don't provide the layers of value. But there's something to the idea that the exchange isn't clear for men or for boys at this point. And going back to what you were saying, have I ever thought about it? I have thought about it. And I think what you're doing is exactly how I would approach it. And it's how I communicate this to people who are trying to get into reading. I don't care if you want to read about ponies, golf, it does not matter. Pick whatever it is, because that will be, if you could get into the habit of reading, it's the bridge that gets you to the next thing. It's the interest. Everything in life for me, and it goes back to Aristotle for novelists, it goes back to everything is interest based. If I wasn't interested in it, I would have never done it and I would have never pursued it to the degree that I wanted to pursue it. Because me forcing somebody to do something, as we're seeing now in the public sphere, is not something that people like to do, be told what to do, what to read, what to say, what to think. And it's no different when you're trying to read. And so I think what you're doing with, hey, if he likes reading swear words, I say more power to it, because he's gonna get all of the other stuff that comes with reading. And I think the trade-off is so much greater than reading the swear word in the book, and where that is going to actually lead him in the habit and some of the soft skills that I just brought up and mentioned before. I have plenty more. I actually have a list on the website, on booksformen.org. I have a little note that I wrote, and I list, I think, 9 different soft skills that you get from reading, and some of the ones that I just talked about. But I think you're on the right track. And that's exactly how I would approach the situation, is going what I would call through the interest principle.
Yeah.
And that is, do what interests you, because that is the thing that is going to lead you to the so-called promised land, I guess.
When he, like, as all children do, they go through phases. And so at one point he was into Minecraft. So I hunted everywhere for stories with the Minecraft characters. So I got those books. And then he was into like some, I can't even remember what it was, but some like manga comic thing on Netflix. So then I like hunted everywhere for the comic books and like, the graphic novels. So then he read those for a while. And like, I always tell him, I don't care what you read. You just need a book in your hand. And,
Right.
and the other thing that I do, and people can judge me for this or not, I don't really care. But any book that he finishes that's over 250 pages, I'll give him a fiver, because he is so entrepreneurial. We are already investing money in stocks and shares ISA, like a child stocks and shares ISA, because that's what he wants to do. So and he wants a job, but he's like, he's 11, he's going to be 11, right? He can't have a job legally, he can't have a job. So I'm like, but what you can do is you can read, and that's how you earn money. That's your work is reading a book. So then you can spend it on Robux if you want to spend it on Robux. I don't care, it's your money. You earn the money by reading the book. So if he's like, oh well, I want this toy, and I'm like, cool, that's 3 books you owe me, right? Like, so I make him earn. And I say to him, you can read whatever you want. I don't care whether it's nonfiction, fiction, you pick the books, but that's how you earn your money. Like, and so we try he's wildly competitive. So like, we try and like give challenges and things like this. But sometimes it works, sometimes he loses interest, sometimes he comes back with interest when he wants something, so yeah, I just try and make it fun for him.
I think those are all great, though. I mean, I think the gamification is something that has been proven time and time again, not just in this, in this segment or in this, with trying to get someone to read more, but the gamification of everything gets people more apt to do something. So I think that that is perfect. And I don't see anything wrong with, you know, having a little incentive to read. I mean, for what it's worth, like when I'm trying to change behavior in my life, the best way to do it is to have some kind of one tracking system for it. So,
I
even
make him
something
track.
as, yeah, even something as writing a book. How many days am I writing in a row? Did I write today? Exit off the calendar, exit off the calendar, like gamify, track it. Am I trying to quit drinking? How many days could I go? Exit off, like it's a gamification of and tracking because that holds you accountable. And I usually build in some kind of incentive at the end. And I'm a 38-year-old guy. So like, if that works for me, like, like, and I'm not saying that there's but like, I don't see if there's any, I see it as a smart way to try to change behavior or to adapt the behavior because we respond to incentives as humans.
100%. And I'm so in like reward driven as well. Ridiculous. I'm definitely part of the dopamine nation. Um, okay, so there was one other I'm supposed to be talking about Aristotle. And we will talk about Aristotle, but I just had one other comment to make about what you said, which I found so interesting about the transactional nature of one, men, but two, nonfiction. And I wonder whether it's like a subconscious stigma that we're putting on fiction because the transactional element of it is an exchange of emotion, and men are brought up to be stiff upper lip, very British type of stiff upper lip, we don't show our emotions, all that bullshit, which I think is total nonsense because we're all human, we all feel, and I wonder whether that's possibly some of the thing that's around it as well subconsciously. But we are supposed to be talking about Aristotle. You can come back on it if you want to.
I have one more
Okay,
thing to add to that,
cool.
if you can, before. I mean, don't worry, we'll talk about Aristotle. I don't, we can talk about whatever. Um, so there is one thing though with the fiction industry specifically that I think is an unseen thing, and it is real. So I mentioned nature and nurture, and I do think that there is a statistically relevant thing in the fiction world specifically that, and this is new to the fiction world and into the literary spectrum, is that it is a predominantly female industry, meaning the people that work in publishing, the people, even to this point now, new authorship, it's predominantly female in the fiction. I mean, I think it's something like 75% of the workforce inside of the publishing industry is female. And there's only one out of every five novels is bought by a man. And so there's like real data that is, and I think that there's a lot of reasons why we don't like to talk about this, because people get afraid that it's, like we're going to go back in time here or something. And I do think that there's a correction that was necessary in this creative industry, but to not acknowledge that it is a heavily female industry would also suggest by just its very nature that there's probably more female-centric books that are coming out than there are male-centric books. And when there isn't men that are actually reading, there's no market incentive to change that. And so we
Mm.
have this kind of like developing situation where yes, there's some things that are nature, but now we have this like nurture element that exists, and we don't really talk about it too much because we're like afraid to, but it is a real thing that is happening inside of the publishing world. And I don't want that to be taken in the wrong light because, like I said, there is a correction that was necessary in the industry. And I do understand that there's a really empowering aspect to that. And I'm a huge supporter of that. But to not talk about the facts either, I think does a disservice to trying to look at this issue with transparency and honesty and finding a solution for it.
So I find all of this very interesting. When I was, do you know what? That's not even relevant. I'm not even going to bring that up. But glass ceiling is what I was going to say. What I would be interested in is because I completely agree. There was a shift in the industry with the workforce. I would be interested on the gender breakdown of management versus non-management staff because I would put money on the fact that there is still a higher portion of men in the management roles in traditional publishing than there are in the main workforce. So I would be very, very interested to see that because I do agree. When you go to conferences, for example, when I go to author conferences, it is just there's women everywhere, right? Everywhere. And when you look at indie authors in particular, there's a far greater number of indie authors who are female than there are male. But look at the bestseller lists, and there's still a very high portion of men in the bestseller list, right?
So the thing that's interesting though, and that I always look at when I look at these kind of numbers and breakdowns, is how many of those authors are legacy authors and how much is
Yeah,
new authorship.
yeah, yeah.
And what I find, especially on the male side, is that a lot of these best-selling authors, they're legacy authors. Like this isn't new male authorship where they're like all of a sudden breakout bestsellers. It's like I don't know, John Grisham, Harlan Coben, like these people who have been there doing this forever. And and they have these entrenched audiences that were there when they started in the 90s and 80s when it was predominantly male, right? And
I
so
I would be
it's
fascinated to see what like, and this is not data that we can pull out of our arseholes, but I wonder how much of this is driven by things like social media and like the breakdown of usage of social media as well, right? Because if you look at the market today, a lot of the people that are breaking through in air quotes that haven't come through like a traditional publishing industry, they are all like TikTok or they've heavily done Facebook ads. And so I wonder whether or not that leans towards a set because when I look at TikTok, it is a lot of women on there. It's mostly women on there, right?
okay. So I've never shared this, but I get Publishers Marketplace, the newsletter. Do you know what Publishers Marketplace, like the
I do.
newsletter is?
Yeah.
So they release their buzz books every, for the coming season. And so on the fall and winter season, I looked at what the buzz books were. And they break them down in debuts and legacy or like new and emerging. And so I excluded all of the legacy and just looked at new and emerging. There was 60 there were or 58 books or something around that 58 or 60 books. I literally created a spreadsheet because I wanted to see what the breakdown was. Guess how many of those were male authors versus female authors of the highly anticipated new emerging authors for this fall and winter season of this year.
And the total number was what?
It was
58.
around 58, I believe. I'd have to go back and look, but I literally broke it down in the spreadsheet. But I know what the number was for men.
Six were men.
You are spot on. It was
Ah!
but think about that. That means
Yeah.
over 90% of the new and emerging authors are And how many of those books were from the six men about male centric topics? Almost none. Almost none. And I get it. There's a lot of books in the literary canon that speak from the male point of view and also speak to a lot of male centric topics because for a long time there was this imbalance. And I totally empathetic to that. But at
Look,
what point?
I'm on your side. As a mother of a son, I
Yes.
am really struggling to find male protagonists at upper middle grade and young adult level. All of the protagonists are female. I want male-centric fiction for my son, especially because my son has two mums. So he's already living in a matriarchal family. I need male-dominated fiction for him, and I can't get it. So I'm on your side. Like I get it. I find
But
this
the thing is
fascinating.
I am not like lobbying for,
Maybe you should be. Why aren't you?
the thing is I don't want someone to take away from this that I devalue or disempower the female voice or the female experience because I'm a huge supporter of it. But
I
at the
don't think
same
anybody
time,
listening to this will be hearing that.
okay.
I think what they're hearing, because what I'm hearing is that you were worried about the next generation of men and them. You're worried about them. That's what
Well,
I'm hearing.
I think what we're seeing is where we're starting to see a lot of problems in the young men across the Western culture is where are they being heard and what voices are they listening to? And at what point do you have to take some kind of responsibility to say, well, maybe we're not giving them anything to latch onto for, I don't know, a million different reasons, and maybe we should. I mean, I'm going to speak from my point of view, my personal experience. I've written male centric fiction that when I've taken it to the marketplace, the response has been, this is great, but who's going to read it?
Are you publishing trad though?
Well, I've tried to some of these works, and the response is, this is great, but who's going to read it? There's no market for this. I have maybe three publishers that I could sell this to, you
So
know?
why don't you indie publish it?
Oh, I will. I will. I
Okay.
mean, I'm just saying these are the types of responses
Yeah.
that you get when you take male centric fiction to the marketplace right now. It's
But you're
not,
taking it to one marketplace. I am
yes.
purely indie author, right? So I make my full-time living, more than full-time living from being an indie author. And so like I make my living because I realized that there were no adult fantasy books for queer women. None. Like they were all either contemporary romances or they were fantasy, but they were for young adults. And I was like, wow, I'm going to fill that space. And so I do. And I didn't even bother going to a publisher. And now I make buttloads of money because I'm plugging a hole in the market and I'm not taking it to a gatekeeper. I think you are so well placed to do this. I think really, I think you have something here and you should just fuck the trad publishing off and go and indie publish it.
I like where your head's at. Maybe this gets at the whole rebel author theme here.
Right? Should we talk about Aristotle?
Yeah, we should. We should.
This
But
was so interesting though.
I'm more than happy to talk about it more anytime you want to.
Yeah, thank you. No, I find this absolutely fascinating. And I can tell that you're really passionate about it. And I really feel like when somebody's passionate about something, like they shouldn't ever let any fear kind of hold them back. They should just like drive forward with it because it's that special thing. It's the legacy you can leave the world, you know? Speaking of legacies, Aristotle has rather a large one. So you wrote a book, Aristotle for Novelists, but like Aristotle's like a bajillion years old. Is it even relevant? Like, why should we even be listening to Aristotle? I'm kidding slightly. Um, so why on earth did you do this?
Okay, that is a phenomenal question. And so I like to always say that I didn't choose to do this. This idea chose me and it was bothering me for a long time because when I learned how to write fiction, to tell stories, I didn't know where to turn. I knew how to write and I say that, kind of with air quotes because it's so subjective writing. But what I mean by that is I knew how to get words down on a page. What I didn't understand how to do was tell a story. And so what I did was I turned to screenwriters. I turned to filmmakers, people like Aaron Sorkin, David Mamet, screenwriting craft people like Robert McKee. And what I quickly realized when I turned to all those, you know, some practitioners and some more theorists, Robert McKee being more of a theorist than the practitioners I mentioned before, uh, they all funneled back to Aristotle. They always mentioned Aristotle. They always talked about Aristotle's poetics. And so then, me being me and following my interest, something that we talked about earlier, I just doubled down on poetics and I read multiple translations. And I quickly realized that, holy crap, like this stuff is so pertinent and intrinsically linked to all of the stories that we tell today on the screen, on the page. And it really forms the principles that are used to, when you flip on Netflix, the shows that you're watching, the movies that you're watching, they all adhere to these principles, whether they know it or not. But a lot of them do because dramatic writers have been utilizing these principles forever. So I was in between writing novels and I said, you know, this idea is bothering me. And I was away on vacation traveling Europe and I just started writing it. And I was like, I'm going to get this down. And then I showed it to some, literary friends, writer friends, and they read it once over and they were like, dude, you got to get this out into the world. Like this is, there's a lot for people to learn from this. And, I'm really excited to share it. And so that's kind of how it came to be.
Okay. So, what I'm hearing is that there's something very intuitive about story.
Very
What is it? What is story?
fundamentally, it's the same for Sasha as it is for Doug, as it is for the books that you write and the stories that you see on television. And that is all stories have a protagonist, Sasha or Doug, who wants something. Sasha wants to get her boy, to read books. We have the formation of a story here. We have Sasha, the protagonist, who wants something. And Sasha has obstacles standing in her way that are both external and internal. Now, I don't know what those internal ones are. They're usually the more interesting ones. But we already talked about what some of the external ones are. So, will Sasha be able to get her son to read male centric books? Dun, dun, dun. I don't know. If she overcomes the obstacles, then we have a comedy. If she succumbs to the obstacles, we have a tragedy. And we learn a more important truth about life if we have a tragedy. There are no books for men. Oh, that's the reason why tragedies work, is because they unveil a truth, even when you succumb to the obstacles. But if you overcome them, 90% of the stories that we read, we enjoy it because we watch that protagonist overcome those obstacles. And so every story, whether it's on the page or whether it's in life, involves an individual, a protagonist who wants something and has obstacles standing in their way, external and internal. And those external obstacles could be anything from the weather to the antagonist to your friends to your family. Could be so many different things. And the internal ones are the more interesting ones, as I had mentioned before. And I could talk a lot more about comedies and tragedies, but the root is that there is a protagonist who wants something and there's obstacles standing in their way. And that is the basis for almost every story.
Story is the oldest form of communication. It is how we evolved. Scientifically, we evolved because we developed the ability to communicate and we communicated in story. Why? Aristotle is a philosopher. So, philosophically speaking, why do we need story? What is it about story? So, you've told me what story is, but what is it about story that works for humanity?
Yeah, so you hit on two things. You hit on something really important. And the reason why Aristotle is sort of interested in this, or the reason why he kind of speaks on this, is because he believes that storytelling, we take so kindly to storytelling as humans because we are imitators and we learn how to live through imitation. As kids, you want your son to read because you want to imitate good behavior, and that's how he's going to learn. This is why Aristotle says one of the big reasons why we took so kindly to storytelling, because storytelling is an imitation of life, and your stories and my stories and everyone's stories should be an emblematic of all that, right? But it's that first piece of why he is such a advocate for stories, or why we took so too keenly to them. The second being rhythm, saying rhythm is natural to humans. This is also one of the reasons why I think you don't have to know grammar to write. You just have, you could just,
I can't do grammar.
yeah,
I
and
didn't get taught it at school. And I'm like, well, I pay an editor for that. Like, and I don't
exactly.
even worry about it. Like, that's not what story is.
Well, because it's if you look at like musicians, a lot of them they'll admit to not knowing how to read music. But why is it that they learn how to play music? Well, it's because of rhythm. And I think that it's the same thing with writing. If you can get on that beat and what Aristotle would call your meter, tone, pacing, voice, tempo, those are all things that have nothing to do with grammar. And if you are consistent and on that, one, you'll eventually learn the basics of grammar, but two, you won't need grammar. You could be totally unorthodox, and the reader is going to know what you're saying and why and how you're saying it. It's the style element, right? That of how you are speaking. It's a little different than story. But let me circle back. You asked the question, why wait, well, I don't want to miss something. So there was an element of something that you said, and I'm trying to remember what it was.
I think I was asking about why story. Why do we need story?
Oh, right.
Um,
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Perfect. So imitation and rhythm are the two reasons why we took so keenly to storytelling. But one of the reasons why Aristotle says in poetics, and poetics, by the way, is his notes and thoughts on the nature of tragedies. So we don't talk, or he doesn't talk about comedies in poetics. He only talks about tragedy. So I led off with talking about the difference between a tragedy and a comedy. He ends poetics saying that now I'm going to talk about comedies, but so much of his work has been lost. So over 200 works, they say, have been lost of Aristotle's, and only 31 have been recovered. And one of those lost works was the second half on comedies. The reason why I bring this up is because in poetics, he says the reason why a tragedy works, and getting to what you're saying, is it because it provides a cathartic experience for the audience. So even though we know our protagonist doesn't overcome those obstacles, we have this cathartic release by watching this bigger truth get unveiled. And it's actually that feeling and that catharsis that we're trying to evoke in the audience. And so I think that that's a huge reason why we read. And comedies on the other end, I think it's evident why one would want to read a comedy, and not a ha-ha laugh comedy, a story where the protagonist overcomes their obstacles, because we're seeing human triumph, and that makes us feel good. Like if you don't feel good by seeing a human or a character defeat the bad guy or get what they want or learn the big lesson, what are you reading for? Like it's like, what are we reading for? And so I think that there's two reasons that are different, and they speak to both sides of the coin, but both would speak to why we're so drawn to stories in general.
Have you ever read anything by Lisa Cron or heard Jennifer Lynn Barnes talk about writing for the id?
Never, but I'd love
Ah,
to
yeah,
hear more.
you'd find it very interesting. Lisa Cron talks about wired for story and why our brains biologically are wired for story. And I can't remember, and the reason I bring up both of them is because I can't remember which one of them said this. I feel like it was one of them, and I could be misquoting them. And now it's gone out of my head what I was going to say. Never mind, because I had another point about what you were
The
talking
same
about
thing just
anyway.
happened to me, so don't worry.
Ah, it's yeah. It's because this is such an interesting conversation. I'm like my brain's just trying to keep up with like all the interesting things that I want to talk about. Um, the thing that I picked up on was you talking about story as a like a cathartic exercise. You strike me as somebody who watches the market, like the publishing market. Am I right in that? Do you watch like trends and things that are happening in the market?
I do, not because I write to them, just because I'm interested
Yeah,
in seeing what's going on in culture and what people are writing about and talking about, and
as a reflection of that.
yeah, as a reflection of that. Yeah, and
Okay.
just seeing what from a commercial aspect, just curious. It speaks to a lot about the times as much as it speaks to anything.
Okay, so this was where I was going with this. I scan the market constantly. I'm obsessed with watching the market. And I think that the book publishing market is a microcosm of society, right? So we can see what happens in society, then directly reflecting what is then successful and trending in publishing. So, for example, during the pandemic, we did not feel physically safe, right? So we saw a massive decrease in dystopian fiction, which is set in an unsafe physical world. And then we saw the rise of kind of cozy fantasy, cozy romance, cozy mysteries. And then as we kind of came out of the pandemic and people were able to escape perhaps potentially horrible situations at home, or there was a lot of domestic violence during COVID, when they were then physically safe, we saw this enormous rise in dark romance. And we're kind of in this dark romance era because everybody feels safe physically. They can then have that cathartic kind of experience in it, they can experience that unsafe situation in a safe situation, if that makes sense. So I kind of feel like, and I absolutely do not want to get political. I do not have politics on this show, but there are certain political situations that are happening in society now and over the last month, which I think are going to I think we're going to see a decrease in dark romance again in the next 2 to 4 years, and we're going to see a rise of something else. And I also feel like we're going to see the rise of angry women fiction. I think angry females are going to be like the protagonist, or I also feel like lesbian romance is about to have its heyday because women are safe. I'm not kidding. So when you look at romance, right, it's always straight romance first, then male romance is like, then that follows that trend. Lesbian romance has never had its heyday, and I am predicting in the next 2 to 3 years, it's going to hit number one in the store. We're going to have it go mainstream for the first time ever.
Okay,
I
so
don't
let me
really,
ask you a question before you get off this point.
yeah.
What do you think that means for male-centric
Yeah, well, that's what
fiction?
I'm saying. Like, that's why I said to you because I already like this is not a new thought for me. This is stuff I've been pondering. But that's why I'm saying to you, like, you should be lobbying. Like, it is clearly a passion of yours. Somebody needs to lobby for it. Somebody should be driving that. And I don't think, like, in this. I am just going to put words in your mouth and I'm going to make assumptions that maybe there's like a fear of cancel culture or a fear of like the repercussions of it. If that's what you're afraid of, that's bullshit. You should just do it anyway, because there are kids like my son who needs a male role model pushing fiction for him.
Yeah, I totally I look at what you're saying now, and it's something that I've thought about and I've seen even over the last week or a couple weeks. We're kind of speaking to the times. And like you said, there's going to be a lot of angry woman fiction.
There
I
is.
think that the idea that all of a sudden there's going to now be this appetite for male-centric fiction is like even more far-fetched, because this is going to make people dig their heels in, I feel like. Um, and that's just kind of my look at it. And I say, oh man, the macro trend for this, like, doesn't look so good if I'm looking at, some of the things that have happened culturally. And I don't know, but I do feel like everything comes in waves. And I think like even if you go back into, I'm a huge film buff. I like films and I like literature, obviously, too. But if you look at art as a whole, in the 70s, it was a lot more risky. And then we had this soup and risky in both music, film, literature, everything was more risky. And then we had this, and then it slowly got over commercialized in the 80s. And it took like almost the grunge like music scene and some of like the more adventurous filmmaking, Tarantino and stuff like that in like the early 90s to really get us back into that risky creative nature in the 90s. And then we slowly start seeing the commercialization, over commercialization. And I'm waiting for a time period because we've kind of haven't gotten there, come back around yet, but I'm waiting for that time period where there's going to be more risky, edgy, outsider type of art that is adopted in a mass sense. But I
Have
don't know if
you?
it ever is going to happen because we have these micro communities now. It's not a
Yeah.
monoculture anymore. And I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Believe me, I like risky, I like odd, I like edgy, I like all of that stuff. I wrote a novel called Tom Collins, a slightly crooked novel, and
But
so
have you read dark romance?
I don't read dark.
But that's my point, right? You cannot get more male, masculine, manly than you do in dark romance. It's like the epitome of like male, male, man, male, like men, men, men. Like and that's what I mean about like the characters in dark romance. They are the extreme end of male. And anyway, I'm going to bring it back to
I'm
Aristotle
getting into
because
that's getting into an area that I have no expertise in at all. I've never read a dark romance. Maybe I should. Maybe you should recommend me one and I'll read it.
I would love to know what you think of it. Oh man, we are like we have not talked about the thing that we're supposed to be talking about. This has been one of my most favorite conversations, I have to say. But we're not actually even talking about bloody Aristotle. Um, okay. What what are you talked about some of like the kind of principles and components, I guess, that Aristotle talks about. If you're talking to a new writer, what would you say is like the top or the top two or a couple of principles that they should be taking from Aristotle?
Okay. This is a good question. And there's so much that I could, talk about because there's so much that is relevant, very relevant. But there's one overarching concept that I think is really important for any new writer to understand, or even any seasoned writer. And this could help a seasoned writer unlock something potentially in their work as well. There's a quote that Aristotle has, and he says, many poets tie the knot well, but unravel it ill. And what he's talking about is that there are two elements to every story, a complication and a resolution. So we have to tie that knot up and then we have to unravel that knot. And I think fundamentally, it's important for any writer to keep an eye on how long they keep that knot tied and when they start to unravel it. Novels are going to be a little different than movies and films, but having that knot question in mind of how long am I drawing out the complication and when am I starting to resolve can really help you outwardly, like your external layout, how you're revealing things to the reader or the viewer. And when you're starting to answer some of those little questions, of course, never answering the big question until you get to the end of your story, some people suggest you keep that knot tied for as long as possible. Some say start answering little questions once you get to, halfway point. If you watch stories, they're all a little bit different. Aristotle would say if you're following, he doesn't say talk about three act structure specifically. He does talk about beginning, middle, and end, which is we could talk about that. But if you if you are looking at a resolution specifically, it should start like a good place for it to start like happening, like from a you unveiling that to the reader, like giving them more information and whatnot, would be right at plot point two, which would be when the change in fortune actually happens for your protagonist, and then you start to bring it home a little bit. Now, this could change. I kind of fall more in the camp of you should start answering little questions in a novel a lot earlier on because it kind of gets, for me anyway, when I'm reading a novel and everything is held too tight for too long, I kind of lose interest. I don't want to be held on that long. I want to start knowing a little things. I want to know why some things are relevant, why other things aren't relevant, and all of that.
It's like the difference between suspense and thriller. I can't read suspense because it's just too slow. Like I need it. I need some of
Yes.
those answers, those, like try fail cycle completed earlier
Yes.
on. Like that, I'll get that from, I don't really read thrillers, but like I could, and I used to read thrillers. I pretty much exclusively read fantasy or contemporary now, but I have forced myself through some suspense type mystery novels, and I can't bear it. I can't bear it.
So I actually like to know what's going to happen because I'm such a story junkie that I like to see how it happens. So I like to see how the author actually did it. I am not someone who gets their story ruined by I'm actually turned on, so to speak, by a story that I could read multiple times, and that usually has to do with not that much trickery. It has to do with me just really enjoying how the story fits together. And
Okay,
I
I'm
get
gonna blow
off
your
on that.
mind. So
Yeah,
you so you reread, right?
I reread. Yeah. If I like a story, I will reread it 100%.
I never reread. However, I also get off on exactly what you're talking about, deconstructing. I call it like deconstruction. I've written a book on deconstruction because but I cannot abide knowing what happens. If I know what happens, I won't read it. If anybody spoils a book for me, I just won't read it. If I watch the film before I've read the book, it's too late. I'll never read the book.
See,
But I actively I do I read in different ways, so like sometimes I will just read for consumption and I will just lose myself, but if I'm reading for knowledge I will actively try and deconstruct. I'll write notes in the margins, I'll put sticky tabs underlining, trying to find what the author's done. I've never missed what they've done doing it this way, but it obviously slows down the reading.
so I can't divorce the way that I learned how to tell stories and viewing them. So I take all of the stuff that I talk about in Aristotle for novelists into every story that I read. And it's an intuitive thing. I didn't write Aristotle for novelists because like I was trying to fill a void in the marketplace and so I read all this stuff about poetics and then I wrote the book. I wrote the book because it's how I see stories. It's like in me because it's how I learned. And so when I'm reading a story, I look at like who is the protagonist? What do they want? What's standing in their way? How long does this storyteller take to unravel their knot? Is the story cohesive? Is it believable? Is it logical? These are all questions that I'm asking myself while I'm reading it because this is what gets me off as a consumer. Maybe I'm not the average consumer, but that
Definitely not.
is
If you're a writer, you're not the average consumer, that's for
but that
sure.
is but that is the stuff that I enjoy. And so when I see somebody do that stuff really well, I say, damn, this person can tell us really great story. Like they are so tight together. And there's so many ways a resolution can go wrong. And this is what I was trying to get to before was if you're a writer, seasoned or new, having that knot question in mind and saying, when does this storyteller begin to unravel that knot? How long do they make the complication go on? That's a great question to ask. And when do they start that resolution? But there's also so many ways the resolution can go wrong once it begins, right? And that's things like cohesion, things like logic, things like believability, all things that I talked about before. I'm going to rail on a show right now because I just watched it and it violated the believability principle to me so badly that I still watched the end of it because I wanted to see what happened. But almost every single decision that they made in this show, I was like, this is so unbelievable. Like this would never happen. Like not in not in the world you're depicting, not in real life. In no world would this actually happen. And that was that show on Apple TV called Disclaimer. Have you seen that? It's with Kate Blanchett. It just came out. It was actually a novel first, and so I apologize to the author if they hear this at some point and like are mad at me, or maybe the screenwriters they completely bastardized but like it was so unbelievable. And this is what I was getting at. The biggest way for me that a novel or any story could go wrong is unbelievability. It is the one thing I've learned from Aristotle and then other practitioners, whether they're musicians or filmmakers or novelists, is that the best ones are able to have you 100% believe in the story that they are telling. Like you believe what is happening in that story. And that doesn't mean it has to be realist. It has to be believable inside of the bounds that you have created for this story. And if you violate that, for me, if I don't believe you, we're done. This relationship is over.
Okay, I have two points I think to make about
And
that. The first,
Aristotle, by the way, says quite straightforward in Poetics that as far as possible, stories shouldn't contain any unbelievable parts.
okay, so
So
I'm
he
going to
is
ask you
very
about that in
insistent.
a second.
He's very insistent on believability, and he'll also say things like likely, needed, probably, all things that are root words for what would happen in this story, not what could happen, what would happen. And it gets to this idea of believability. And I'm just a huge believer in it. And I see violations of it all the time if I'm being really analytical and cynical, which obviously you could tell I could be. And that doesn't mean it's not publishable. It doesn't mean it's not commercial. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means it violates believability. And to me, there's a difference between all of the things that I had just mentioned
Okay,
and believability.
I am a sinner when it comes to reading. I very rarely read more than the first book in a series, and I'll tell you why. Of all the series that I have read, I very rarely like the ending of the series. Very rarely. I'm almost always disappointed. So I have
Me and you
just,
are already huge friends
I know,
because
right?
this is exactly my problem with a lot of books in general.
I have just finished my latest trilogy, and I have never been more sick with anxiety because I know that I don't like most series endings, and I was like, I just like, what if I fucked up? Anyway, my ARC readers have already they all love the ending, so I'm like, okay, cool. Now I need to go back and deconstruct my own series to figure out what I did and why they liked it, right? Because I don't. It was intuitive. I wrote it intuitively. I didn't go and study series endings, but this is what I want to come back to. Like, you talk about that believability, and I wonder how much it is that emotion drives that and whether or not there's something else added to that. Because I think I often feel emotionally disappointed because it wasn't the ending that I felt was promised, or I didn't the transaction that I thought. It's like I thought I was gonna buy Haagen-Dazs and I actually got Mr. Whippy 99p ice cream, you know? So what is it that makes a believable ending? Like, do you have an example of an ending that has worked for you
Yeah,
and
I have
why?
so many endings that have worked for me, and so many books and movies and with endings that are just masterful to me.
Do
And a
you
lot of
have
them,
one that's like really, like maybe really, or maybe a movie that's really obvious or something that a lot of people would have seen?
sure. Oh, well, have you ever? Oh, this is a very masculine piece of fiction, so it would kind of go, it would kind of go on theme here. But I don't know if you've ever read it. Have you ever read The Road by Cormac McCarthy?
I haven't, but I did read, is
Okay.
it The Passage by Justin Cronin, which also felt like quite a masculine.
Okay. So, okay. Let me. Okay. Oh, here we go. This is a perfect one. This is a perfect one. Rocky. Have
Okay.
you seen? Everyone's seen Rocky.
Everybody's seen Rocky. It's been a long time, but yes, I did watch Rocky.
Rocky loses at the end. Do you think that was a smart storytelling decision? I
No, and
think
I'd actually forgotten that. I'd actually forgotten that.
it was an excellent storytelling decision because it makes the story more believable because the story isn't about Rocky overcoming, beating Apollo Creed. It's about proving to himself. So it's about self-love that he can do it. And by doing that, he proves to his wife, like his love interest, that he can do it. And so the story is about love. It's not about winning and losing. So why do we have to have this protagonist win? Let's do the more believable thing. Let's just make him last 15 rounds with the champ of the world, but it actually loses. If he wins, that story is not even nearly as good. But because he loses, you have a sequel and you have the whole series and you have everything. And it's all rests on that last decision of does Rocky win or does Rocky lose? And him losing actually pulls the story through. That's a very simple that story is a tremendous story of like it's a perfectly written story. And most people lose that in the idea that Sylvester Stallone is this hulking, you know, action star. When he wrote that, he was not the hulking action star. He was like a homeless guy living in literally with no money to his name. And the idea that he wrote this screenplay and it was him and then him asking to star in it. It was this, it wasn't what people think of. And only reason why I bring this up is because the story is told so well. It's a story about love. It's not a story about winning and losing. It's a story, he's a tireless hulking fighter with low self-esteem. Like he has low self-esteem and he's dumb. And that's a sad thing to say about somebody, but that's the character. Go watch the first Rocky. He's dumb and he has self-esteem problem and he has low self-esteem. How could this guy have low self-esteem? Look at him. Well, that's what makes it so interesting. And then you have all of his obstacles. Paulie, Mickey, people that are on his team, they're all doubting that he can do it. That's juxtaposing against the fact that he doesn't think he could do it. And so then finally, when he meets Adrian, he has this connection with her and he wants to prove to her that he can do it. And just as much as he wants to prove to himself that he can do it, winning and losing doesn't matter. And we never violate the idea that this isn't a story about winning and losing. This is a story about increasing self-esteem, having more self-love, proving that you to the world that you can do it, that you can last 15 rounds with the champion. And they make that decision to not have him win. And it's entirely cohesive and it's entirely believable. And we lose that because the series changes as it goes on, but that's typically what happens. But that first movie, which won the Oscar, by the way, for Best Picture, is a perfect example of that. But I can give you tons. I can give you tons. Another would be Mystic River. You ever watch Mystic River?
No.
So in Mystic River, Sean Penn, now for a guy like Sean Penn in that movie, who is trying to get to the bottom of who killed his daughter, he and it's three friends who get interlinked into this. You have Sean Penn, who is this ex-con. You have the Kevin Bacon, who plays the cop. And then you have Tim Robbins, who plays this really traumatized friend of theirs who was kidnapped and abducted by three strangers when they were younger. And so Sean Penn has this connection to him, like he allowed that to happen. But the story leads down the road of it appearing like Tim Robbins, much later, is the one who killed the daughter. And you don't realize that. You don't know the truth of it. And so Sean Penn, at the end of that movie, kills Tim Robbins, thinking that he is the one who killed the daughter. You don't learn, and he doesn't learn until after he kills him that he isn't the person. So, what would be harder for an ex con character like Sean Penn, going to jail or having to live the rest of your life knowing that you killed an innocent man who you swore to protect mentally because when you were kids, you allowed him to be, in your mind, to be abducted by these men and traumatized? You kill that man, find out later, after it happens, that he actually didn't do it. What's worse? What's a worse way to go? Going to jail or to have to live the rest of your life like that? That's a story decision that makes that so much more believable, because what's so much harder for that kind of character would be living with that, not going to jail. And so it makes it so much more believable and so much more entertaining because the characters do exactly what you think they would do. And it's the plot that then reveals the ending. Nothing comes from outside of it. This is one thing that Aristotle is really insistent about. Avoid deus ex machina. And that is a term for when something comes from outside of your plot to solve a plot problem because it's unlikely. It's not as probable. These are all words that you hear Aristotle use in poetics. And I'm sorry, I'm ranting a little bit here, but I've given you a couple. I'm sure you
Yeah.
have your own, and I could go on and on about other ones, but I think those are probably some good ones.
Well, I think what I've kind of taken from this is that theme is really important and really because we have the plot of the story and then we have what the story's really about. And in order to get the ending right, you have to know what your story's really about. And so I suppose there is, it doesn't matter whether you are a plotter or you write into the dark or whatever, you pants or whatever, as long as you can draw that thematic element out. Because particularly with Rocky, and when you were talking about the fact that it wasn't really about the fight, that wasn't what the story was, and the reason that the movie works so well is because it gave the right ending for the bit of the story that it was really about. To me, that says theme, and maybe it's just semantics, and we've all got different words to explain the same thing, but I think that's my framework and how I kind of understand it, and it's yeah, kind of
I also
connect.
think it gets at this other idea that I talk about in Aristotle for novelists, and I forget what it's one of the later principles, and it's novels should be about true characters, and true characters aren't true to real life. I mean, they're not true. Yeah, they're not like fact and fiction. It's true to that character. So once we've defined who this character is, and actually Aristotle has four ways to define a character. It's goodness, which is they are good if their actions are good. Appropriateness, meaning are they acting appropriately? So it gets to the heart of what we're saying, not appropriately good or bad, but are they acting appropriately based on who they are? And then there's the relatability piece, as in how relatable are they to humans? So we talked about imitation to life. Are they relatable because we can see these characters in real life? Like are they relatable? And then there's the consistency piece, which is the fourth piece of a character in the Aristotelian sense, and that is, are they consistent throughout your story? So are they, even if a character is, he says in poetics, even if you were to imagine a character who is by their nature inconsistent, they should be consistently inconsistent. We see this with unreliable narrators all the time, right? And getting back to what we talked about before with imitation, that's root for action. So what we know with unreliable narrators is that they could say whatever they want, but eventually it's their actions that don't align with their words. And so we learn the truth of that character eventually. And I think that when you look at all of this stuff and we're kind of giving this really 30,000 foot view of it, how true is your character? Are they doing what your character would do in that situation? Or are they doing what they could do? Or are you showing what could happen? And I think that these are all little wrinkles that we could look at and see if we're telling a believable story. When I was just ragging on disclaimer, everything that the characters did, I said, that's not what they would do. That's not what would happen. And I'm not saying like this has to be real life because you want us to, they're telling me a story, but as soon as you disrupt that believability piece, now you start to question everything else that's happening in the story, right? And I think that it gets to the heart of how true are these characters? Are they making the decisions that these characters would make based on their moral disposition, who they are as characters? And we define that early, or hopefully we define that early in a story. I at least have those expectations when I watch a story or read a story. I said before, one of the first things I look at is what does this character want? What are they, what are their obstacles? You you learn who this character is quickly. If the author, whether it's on the screen or on the page, is doing a good job, you know who this character is relatively quickly. And then you learn more about them. And it doesn't mean they can't be changed as the story goes on. It just means there is some kind of nonverbal exchange that happens between a consumer and a creator that exists, and you can break that and fracture it. And I'm going to tie this all into a bow right now. Think about it in real life. Who are the people that have the most problems with what you do in the life that you live? For me, it's the people that are closest to me. Family who have seen you go through so many iterations of life. And I've come to realize that the reason why they struggle with this is because they don't believe you. Because in their mind, they see the other version of you. You can't trick them like you can trick the world. And I'm not saying it like you are being someone that you're not. I'm just saying they've seen every iteration of you. So the thing that they can't wrap their head around is why aren't they Doug at 18 instead of Doug at 38? They can't unsee 18, so they can't believe me. And that is why my story is harder to resonate with them. But someone like Sasha, who comes at me for the first time, this is what you know. I know, this is what you know. It's a
Probably why
belief
so
thing.
many marriages break down as well, because they don't believe in the change.
This
But
is the power, but this is the power of the Aristotelian method of like story. It's so linked to how we live. It's
mm,
like intrinsically linked to life. These are life stories as much as they're stories on the page.
well, I am devastated that I have to ask you the ultimate podcast question, but I do because we are over time. I could definitely talk to you for another hour about this. This has been very, very, very fascinating intellectually for me. So I really appreciate that you came on and talked. But this is the Rebel Author Podcast. So tell everyone about a time you unleashed your inner rebel.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question, and it's one that I instinctively would answer with this, and that is I think there's a standard narrative of how we have to live life. And I'm not saying that's the right way. There is no right or wrong way, in my opinion. But there's definitely a standard narrative. And by that standard narrative, it is get married, or go to school, go to college, get a job, get married, have kids, buy the house, retire, vacation. It's a standard narrative. And I know why people live it. And I'm not here to attack people that are living that. 90% of the people that are in my life live the standard narrative. That is, there's safety, there's comfort, there's familiarity, but it's one that our society has propagated and pitched to us over and over and over again in multiple ways. Some intuitive and conscious, others subconscious. I am very aware of this standard narrative. And for me, in my life, I've chosen to kind of live against the standard narrative of life. I don't let it dictate what the next step is for me. I don't let it dictate the stories I want to write, the things that I'm interested in. You might have a story that you want to place on my life, but I don't allow that narrative to affect the way and the decisions that I make. And to me, there's nothing more rebellious than that, because when I look at the effect of this standard narrative on a macro level, it's so widespread and so everywhere that by living against it and living your true sense of what it means to do whatever it is, that is the most rebellious thing that you could do. And like Aristotle says, it's actions that are the most important piece. So it's how I live is going to be the lasting memory that people have of me and when they come in contact with me. And it's up to me whether I want to live counterintuitive to that standard narrative or adhere to it. And I'm not saying that one has to go one way or the other, but there needs to be some voices like me. Otherwise, people are going to just go along to get along. And they're going to say, why are you 38, single, with no kids, with no house, living in an apartment, writing books? And, like, what is this life that you're living? Well, it's not the standard narrative. And I'm happy and proud of it. And so to me, there's nothing more rebellious than that. And I hope that satisfies the rebel author
It does.
question.
It does. But rebellion has a very bad rap. There's a lot of stigma around the word and the connotations associated with rebellion. And over 267 episodes, or however many episodes I've done in this podcast now, there is one thematic connector for every single rebellion that, because I read one out and I ask the guest a rebellion. So there's two rebellions on every episode, and it's joy. People rebel because they are seeking joy, and something in their life is making them unhappy, whether it be on a large scale, a micro scale, a personal scale, and we rebel to joy seek. And that is the perfect textbook definition of a rebellion that you just gave me. So thank you.
I think that for me personally, I am so attracted to writing because I do view it as an outsider endeavor. And there's something very rebellious inherently to it. This might sound weird to some people who know me as outgoing, but people who really know me know that I'm very allergic to groups. I look at groups and groupthink and this very this herd mentality that's associated with it. And it's the thing that kind of irks me. And I know that this is very particular to me. And so I'm not saying that everybody has to think this way, but I do think that most people, authors, probably like yourself, this is the foundation of the rebellion. It's like, well, why do we have to think this way? Like, why am I thinking the same way as you are? Or why am I, just because I want to feel good, fit in, survive? I get it. And it's harder to go off on your own and do the individual thing. But to me, and if I'm being totally honest, the most admirable people to me are those people. And that's not to say the other people aren't doing good things. And we don't need everybody. We need everybody to be everybody. But for me and how I view the world, it's the rebels that I actually admire because they're pushing against the current. They're pushing against the things that they think are wrong and they're actually standing for something. And that to me is probably the hardest thing to do.
I completely agree. Well, thank you for your time today. Would you like to tell everyone where they can find out more about you and your books and anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, it's very easy. For me, you can go to douglasvigliotti.com. So my name.com for the book, Aristotle for Novelists. Very easy place for you to go to, aristotlefornovelists.com. And if you want to learn more about my podcast, which we talked a little bit about at the top of this episode or this conversation, just go to booksformen.org. So that's it. douglasvigliotti.com, aristotlefornovelists.com, and booksformen.org.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. And of course, a giant thank you to all of the show's listeners and all of the show's patrons. If you would like to get early access to all of the episodes, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/Sasha Black. I'm Sasha Black. You were listening to Douglas Vigliotti, and this was the Rebel Author Podcast. Next week, I'm talking to Nicole Glover all about how to write historical fantasy. So join me next week for that. Don't forget to tune in and subscribe on your podcatcher. And when you have a moment, please leave a review.